It starts subtly, almost too subtly to notice at first. Maybe it's a night here, and then when you don't wake up with morning wood like you used to. Or maybe it's the moment when you realize that the kind of spontaneous desire you once felt has slowly been replaced by a quieter, almost hesitant energy. And what's so confusing about it is that everything else in your life might feel relatively normal. Your job, your family, your appetite for food, even your interest in sex, but something beneath. The surface isn't responding the way it used to, and you find yourself wondering, is this just age catching up to me? Is this normal? Or worse, is something inside me breaking down and I don't know how to stop it? And the reality is, for millions of men over 60, what feels like a mysterious drop in sexual function is actually being driven by one mistake, one small daily habit that almost no one talks about. And this mistake doesn't have to do with what you're doing in the bedroom, but everything to do with what's happening in your daily lifestyle, a seemingly innocent behavior that silently chips away at your erections, week after week, year after year, until one day you wake up and feel disconnected from your body, your energy, and your sense of masculinity. And that mistake is chronic, unaddressed pelvic tension, a tightness that builds slowly in the muscles surrounding your hips, lower back, and especially the pelvic floor. And what most men don't realize is that this area of the body, the pelvic bowl, is like the electrical panel for male sexual function. It houses the nerves, blood vessels, and muscles that control erections, orgasm, and even bladder and bowel function. And when this area becomes rigid due to years of sitting, lack of movement, shallow breathing, or even stored emotional stress, it restricts blood flow, compresses nerves, and disrupts the very feedback loop that makes an erection possible. And the worst part is this tension isn't always felt as pain. In fact, it can feel like nothing at all, just a background numbness or stiffness that you've learned to live with, not realizing that it's creating a bottleneck in your most essential systems. And if you've ever noticed that your erections are slower to arrive, weaker than before, or disappear mid-act without warning, chances are it has less to do with testosterone levels or aging, and far more to do with this hidden tension that's been building up like rust in a machine, slowing everything down until it simply stops working. And what makes this mistake even more dangerous is that it's self-perpetuating, because the moment a man begins to experience erectile inconsistency, the natural reaction is panic, shame, or anxiety, and that emotional stress feeds back into the body, tensing it further, especially in the pelvic region, causing even more restriction and dysfunction, which leads to more poor experiences, more hesitation, and eventually a deep-seated belief that sex is over, pleasure is behind you, and intimacy is now something to fear instead of look forward to. But the truth is, this cycle could be broken, not with pills or surgeries, but with awareness, with intentional release, and with a few small but powerful shifts in how you treat your body each day. Because when you understand how pelvic health governs sexual health, you begin to realize that most of what we blame on aging is actually a series of reversible mechanical patterns that just need the right kind of attention. And this is where the journey begins, not with a magic solution, but with a new perspective. One that says you're not broken, you're not too far gone, and the body you have right now is still capable of powerful, lasting erections, fulfilling intimacy, and the kind of deep, confident pleasure that doesn't disappear with time, but rather evolves into something even richer if you allow it. And to get there, We must first strip away the shame, the silence, and the misinformation and begin to look at the real root causes. And that starts by turning inward into the core of the body where the pelvic muscles reside, where years of tension are held, often unconsciously, and where the key to reactivating your erections, your desire, and your connection to self still waits quietly, ready to be reawakened with just a few small daily changes that will not only restore function, but bring you back into alignment with your own strength, your vitality, and your sense of being fully, unapologetically alive again. And once a man begins to understand that the core of his declining erection strength isn't just about hormones or age, but about a pattern of silent physical tension building in the most intimate layers of his body, he starts to see everything differently. Not with fear, but with clarity. Because suddenly, the story isn't about deterioration, it's about opportunity. And the first major opportunity is to finally address the way we move, or more accurately, the way we've stopped moving. Because for most men over 60 decades of sitting, at work, in the car, on the couch, have trained the pelvic floor and surrounding muscles to stay locked in a semi-contracted state. And the longer these muscles remain tight without release, the more they compress blood vessels and nerves that feed the penis. And the result is exactly what so many silently suffer with: difficulty getting hard, staying hard, or even feeling fully aroused. But the solution doesn't begin in the doctor's office. It begins in the body itself, through specific movements, stretches, and breath work that gently unravel this tightness. Almost like untangling a garden hose that's been kinked for too long. Because when blood finally flows freely again through the arteries of the pelvis and perineum, when nerves regain their full range of responsiveness, and when the brain's signals can travel without obstruction, something truly transformative begins to happen. Not only do erections return with more strength and reliability, but so does a man's confidence. And this confidence isn't just about sex, it's about how he carries himself in the world, how he walks into a room, how he speaks, how he reconnects to his body, not as a failing machine, but as something sacred and powerful that's simply been neglected or misunderstood. And this is where something almost miraculous occurs, because men who begin engaging in regular pelvic release practices, whether it's through hip openers, pelvic tilts, diaphragmatic breathing, or guided perineal massage, report not just improved sexual function, but better sleep, better digestion, less lower back pain, and even reduced prostate symptoms. And that's because the body doesn't heal in isolation, it heals in systems. So when one system, like the pelvic floor, is nourished and reawakened, other systems begin to balance themselves as well. And what's so empowering is that these benefits don't require years to emerge. In fact, many men begin noticing improvements within weeks, simply from committing to 10 to 15 minutes a day of focused pelvic health movement. And while this may sound trivial or even awkward at first, what more awkward is silently suffering for years without ever knowing that the solution was available, free, and within your control all along. And this is why so many health-forward urologists are now shifting their focus away from medications as the first line of defense, and instead encouraging their older male patients to embrace pelvic floor retraining and gentle therapeutic touch, because pills can only override the symptoms temporarily, but they don't fix the mechanical root of the problem. And what matters most is not temporary fixes, but lasting vitality. And that vitality starts with trust. The trust that your body can still recover, that it hasn't given up on you, that it wants to heal, to open, to respond, and that it's simply been waiting for you to give it permission. And part of that permission is learning to breathe again. Not shallow chest breathing, but deep belly breathing that expands the diaphragm and massages the internal organs from within. Because each breath, when done mindfully, becomes an act of restoration, an internal massage that softens the pelvic floor and rebalances the nervous system, bringing you out of fight or flight and into rest and receive, which is the only state in which arousal and erection can truly flourish. And so many men are stuck in a loop of stress and tightness, not knowing that. Their nervous system has been hijacked by years of tension, work, unresolved emotions, and trauma. But the moment they begin to reclaim control of their breath, their hips, and their awareness, the body starts to melt in the right places and come alive in the others. And what was once a mystery, why things don't work like they used to, becomes a map, a roadmap back to strength, back to sensation, back to full-bodied intimacy that isn't about performance or pressure, but about the quiet satisfaction of knowing your body still listens, still remembers, still responds when given the right care. And what emerges from this realization isn't just better sex. It's a better relationship with yourself, because at the end of the day, erections are not only physical, they are emotional, they are energetic, they are expressions of vitality. And to restore that vitality is to reclaim not only pleasure, but presence, power, and pride in your own aliveness. And the more men begin to embody this new awareness of their pelvic health and its intimate connection to sexual performance, the more they start to uncover the deeper emotional layers that are just as responsible for weakening erections as any physical factor. Because for so many men, especially after 60, sexual energy becomes entangled with years of shame, silence, disappointment, and unspoken fear. Fear that they're no longer desirable, that their body has betrayed them, that they'll be seen as weak or inadequate if they can't perform like they used to. And this emotional pressure does something devastating to the male nervous system. It shuts it down slowly but consistently, flooding it with cortisol, tightening the muscles, disrupting sleep, flattening libido, and pulling the body into a chronic stress response that is biologically incompatible with arousal. Because an erection doesn't just require blood flow and muscle relaxation, it requires a sense of safety, psychological safety, emotional safety, and self-acceptance. And yet so many men are trapped in a mental state where every sexual encounter feels like a test, a performance, or a ticking time bomb. And over time, this internalized pressure teaches the body to brace, to expect failure, and that bracing becomes the very thing that prevents excess, creating a tragic feedback loop that erodes confidence, intimacy, and ultimately, the belief that change is possible. And what's most heartbreaking is that none of this has to be permanent, because once a man understands that the root mistake isn't age or inevitable decline, but the way he holds tension in his body, avoids vulnerability, and distances himself from the most honest parts of his sexuality, everything begins to shift. And it starts when he gives himself permission to slow down, to let go of the outcome, to explore his own arousal, not through the lens of performance, but through the lens of presence. And in that presence, something sacred is restored, a sense of connection, not only to his body, but to his capacity for intimacy, touch, and trust. And this is why pelvic release work and breath training are so powerful. Not only because they improve blood flow and muscle coordination, but because they create space for pleasure to grow without pressure, space for arousal to return naturally, space for self-compassion to soften the years of silent disappointment. And it's in that softening that erections begin to rise again. Not forced or faked, but real, responsive, and strong. And that strength is built not in one moment, but over time, as the nervous system relearns how to relax, as the muscles of the pelvic floor are invited to let go, and as the man reconnects with his right to feel pleasure on his own terms, without apology or fear. And the surprising part is that when this shift begins internally, everything external starts to change too. Relationships become more honest. Anxiety fades, sleep improves, digestion eases, and a quiet confidence returns, the kind that doesn't come from a pill or a supplement, but from the steady realization that your body is not failing you. It's simply asking to be listened to differently. And when you start to listen not with judgment, but with curiosity, the signals become clear. The way your hips hold tension when you sit, the way your breath shortens when you're anxious, the way your body locks up when you try to force arousal instead of allowing it. And when you catch these patterns in real time, you can begin to change them, not all at once, but day by day, breath by breath, sensation by sensation. And this process isn't about becoming who you were at 30. It's about becoming the strongest, most grounded version of who you are now. Because there's nothing more powerful than a man who is fully present in his body, fully at peace with his age, and fully alive in his desire. And this level of vitality isn't reserved for a lucky few. It's available to every man who is willing to take a new path, to let go of old beliefs, and to reclaim his body not as a machine to fix, but as a living, breathing instrument of sensation, intimacy, and strength. And in doing so, what you recover isn't just erections. It's your relationship to energy, to joy, to the quiet fire that still burns inside you, waiting only for your attention to come back to life. And as the layers of tension are slowly unraveled, as the breath deepens and the awareness of the pelvic body returns, what begins to emerge is not only stronger erections and more fulfilling intimacy, but something far more important and far less talked about. Peace, a kind of inner quiet that replaces the noise of doubt, pressure, and shame with the calm, knowing that you are enough exactly as you are. Because for too long, men have been taught to tie their worth to performance, to measure their masculinity by how hard or how often, to stay silent about their struggles and carry the weight of expectations on their own. But aging invites a different way of being, one that values presence over perfection, softness over speed, connection over conquest. And in that shift lies freedom. The kind of freedom that allows a man to explore his own pleasure with curiosity, without needing to prove anything. To be witnessed and loved without performance. To reclaim sexuality not as a contest or duty, but as a natural extension of well-being, vitality, and joy. And this kind of freedom cannot be found in pills or fleeting results or external validation. It is found only by turning inward, by asking new questions, by listening to the quiet wisdom of the body that so often goes ignored until something goes wrong. But by then it's not too late. It never is, because the human body, especially the male body, is resilient, responsive, and capable of incredible restoration when given even the smallest invitation to heal. And that invitation starts with you, with one conscious breath, with one gentle stretch, with one courageous choice to ask, what if nothing is wrong with me? What if I've just been living in a pattern that no longer serves me? What if there's a different path forward, one where I get to enjoy not just erections but energy, not just pleasure but presence, not just sex but serenity? And when that path is followed, not with urgency but with care, the body remembers, the blood flows again, the nerves awaken, the shame dissolves, and what is left is not the man you once were, but the man you were always meant to become. Strong, awake at ease, and deeply in tune with the rhythms of your own desire and wellness, because this is the real goal, not just to function, but to thrive, to feel, to reconnect with the primal, powerful essence of being alive and embodied no matter your age. And the mistake that once silently weakened you, chronic pelvic tension and the silence around it, becomes the very doorway into healing, into understanding, and into a kind of strength that is no longer defined by appearance or performance, but by connection, softness, and a quiet fire of vitality that still lives in your core and will continue to burn brighter the more you honor it, trust it, and care for it with the respect it has always deserved. And so if you take nothing else from this, let it be the truth that you are not broken, that your age does not diminish, your right to pleasure, and that your body, with all its changes, is still worthy of attention, exploration, and deep, healing joy. And from this place of new understanding, the journey forward becomes less about fixing and more about rediscovery of your body, your breath, your energy, and the intimate power that was never lost, only waiting to be awakened again with your permission and your presence. Because this is not the end. This is the beginning of something far more powerful than what you've left behind, and it starts right now.